Hello and welcome to this Lightroom black and white edit. Today I'm gonna take this raw file and turn it into a very dramatic black and white picture like this, while of course explaining to you every single adjustment I do from start to finish. This really is just a snapshot of some mountains in the far background, and I really just like the look. I love the texture in the clouds, and I love the actual rocks and the formation on the mountain. I shot this at 300mm, which is definitely far into the telephoto. So first thing I'm gonna do, obviously turn it into black and white, and the first thing I'm gonna do is just bring down the highlights quite a bit, so we get a lot of structure and a lot of texture from the clouds. And then I'm also going to bring up the shadows just so we have a lot of detail to work with, and also so I can bring down the blacks a little bit more. If you want to create a dramatic black and white picture, I really would suggest you to raise the shadows and bring down the blacks quite a lot, because that way you really get a very contrasty scene. So if I would, for example, just bring down the shadows to 0 and bring down the blacks, you see everything is kind of too dark. So by just bringing up the shadows, we really get a lot of contrast and a lot of texture while not making everything just look super dark. So I think that looks pretty good. However, I think the overall exposure is kind of too dark. So I'm gonna bring up the global exposure here quite a lot, actually by a full stop right here. I really underexposed this picture, and let's quickly adjust the highlight slider and bring it down from -75 to -100 just to compensate for that plus exposure that we've done. So I really like this starting point, it really looks pretty good. Then let's go to the contrast slider, and I'm definitely gonna bring the contrast slider to the right. This will be a very heavy edit, but I really just like this look of bringing the contrast to 100 the best. So that looks pretty good. Let's go back to the blacks and see if we can add a little bit more blacks even after bringing up the global exposure, and I think that looks even better. So the last thing here in the basics adjustment would be clarity, and actually clarity is pretty difficult. You could just add clarity globally, and I might do that, just a hint, probably around +20, but I really don't want to add 100 or a lot. Even though I like the look on some of these parts on the rocks, I kind of want to keep it relatively neutral for the start, and then just go into the local adjustments later once I'm done with all of the global adjustments, and just add some more clarity very locally in just some parts of the image. So that looks pretty good. Then let's go down here to the tonal curve, and I'm just gonna bring up the highlight slider a little bit to create some more dynamic, and the rest of these sliders I'm really just gonna play around with these and just stick with whatever looks best as usual. I think I might even bring down the darks a little bit. And let's see the shadows. I really like the shadow slider for black and white pictures like this, because the shadows here are completely different to the shadows up here. Up here the shadows will just kind of affect the whole kind of darkish part of your image, while the shadow slider in the tonal curve really just affected the very dark parts of your picture. So I like to bring that down here just to create some additional contrast, and I really definitely like this look. Here is before the tonal curve adjustments, and here is after. And actually a thing that I am also going to adjust here is the point curve. This is a thing that I usually leave out, but for this black and white picture I really want to see if there's any setting I like better. So this really just adds a very subtle version of contrast, and I think I'm gonna go here with medium contrast. Strong contrast is a bit too much, and linear is a bit too flat compared to medium contrast, so I'm just gonna stick there and go down. Now HSL tool really don't have to worry about that in black and white, and split toning. Even in black and white you could add some color, and I mean, it doesn't look bad, but in this case I think I'm gonna keep it pure black and white. Alright, then let's go down here to the detail tool. For the detail tool, you always want to make sure that you zoom in 1:1 so you actually see what you do. And first thing you notice is that there is a lot of noise because we've raised the shadows so much, we've raised the exposure, really heavy adjustments, and we're obviously gonna get some noise from that. But I really don't mind noise in my black and white pictures nearly as much as I do in my color pictures. It can sometimes even give the whole picture a sense of character, and I really sometimes even like this look. So in this black and white picture, even though the noise is quite severe, I really don't want to add any noise reduction, because by adding noise reduction you really get rid of so much detail, and I really don't like this look. I'd rather have a little bit of noise and in exchange have the full detail. So I think that looks pretty good. Let's bring up the sharpening, because sharpening is definitely a really great tool, especially if you shoot something way in the distance. Some sharpening can often help. The only thing you want to look out here is that you don't overdo it with the sharpening. I think around 60 works the best for this photo. So once you've added sharpening, you just want to zoom back out again, hold down the Alt key and bring the masking slider to the right, and now it will show you a sharpening mask. Everything that is white is going to be sharpened, and everything that is black is not going to be sharpened. So here you just want to make sure that you bring that to the right until you don't have too much of the sky selected, until you don't have too much of the snow or any non-textured surface selected. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just by bringing it to the right, you really avoid a lot of the noise, especially in the non-textured places on your picture. So I think that looks pretty good. The color slider, really don't have to worry about any of that, because of course it's a black and white picture. But down here at the lens corrections, my basic thing that I usually do is just go to enable profile corrections, choose my lens, in this case the Tamron 70-300, and it will get rid of the vignetting as well as the distortion. Now, distortion removing is definitely a nice thing for pretty much every picture, but for the vignetting removing, I sometimes even like to bring that down to 0 again, just because I kinda like some vignetting in my black and white pictures. Especially in this very dramatic picture right here, I really like the look of vignetting. And speaking of vignetting, down here at the effects you can add some additional vignetting, and this is actually a thing that I do quite a lot. You definitely don't want to overdo that. This is completely optional as well, but for this photo I think a little bit of vignetting works quite well, and I definitely do like this look. Then down here at the camera calibration, here you could play around with the profiles and also the color sliders. Even in black and white, these adjustments will have an impact to your picture, but the impact really isn't that severe and that big, so I'm just gonna leave them out, and I'm just gonna say that I'm done with the global adjustments. So now comes the fun part, which is the local adjustments. And actually, before I add any local adjustments, I think I'm gonna crop this picture at least a little bit. So as you can see, there's really a lot of sky, and even though I like the texture in the clouds of the sky, I really think it kinda distracts too much of the actual mountains. So I think I'm just gonna crop down some of this sky, not too much, but just so we have a little bit more mountains compared to the background sky. So that looks pretty good. Now let's go into the local adjustments. First thing I'm gonna do here is grab an adjustment brush and just bring up the exposure slightly. Make sure that the feather is to 100, very important, so your adjustments will look very natural. And then I'm just kinda gonna add some dodge and burning with the adjustment brush. As you can see, this is way too much, so let me bring down the plus exposure a little bit here. I could also mix this with a little bit of clarity, just a hint, and I think that works pretty well. So I'm just gonna paint over some of these areas. You want to make sure that this looks very natural. At the end, I might adjust the exposure once again once I'm done, but I'm just gonna paint over some of these areas and just kind of add some plus exposure here, make everything a little bit more interesting, kind of complexify the light. Usually this is something I do with the radial filter, but for this picture I really think the adjustment brush will work the best. So let's just add some brush strokes right here, maybe some more plus exposure over here and over there as well. Why not some down over here? And I mean, this is definitely a thing that kind of takes some time, but because I'm making a tutorial, I really want to keep this as short as I can. And actually, I think it might be still a little bit too bright, so I'm going to bring down the exposure even a little bit more. So here would be before any adjustment brush, and here's after. Really kind of make the whole scene a little bit more interesting. So then I'm just gonna click on new with the adjustment brush, and it will give me a new adjustment brush, and this time I want to reset the exposure to 0, but I want to bring up the contrast just slightly and add a lot of clarity. And then I'm really just gonna add some clarity in some portions of the picture, so that way you really get some more interest and some more local clarity, which kind of differentiates everything and doesn't make everything look as even. And actually I might have added a little bit too much contrast right here. Let me just try and add a little bit more clarity instead. If I press O, you can see the masks here where I've already added clarity. You definitely don't want to do this too much, otherwise you might as well just add global clarity. I'm also going to clean up the edges here just by clicking on the Alt key and removing the areas of clarity that I don't want any clarity in, if that made any sense. But anyways, I'm just going to paint along here and just add some more areas with plus clarity, and let's press O again to get rid of the mask, and I think that looks pretty good. So let's see before any adjustment brushes, and here's after. It really seems a bit obvious at first, but once you look at the picture for a little bit, it really starts to look natural, and I really like the added dynamic from before and after. So let me think. I think I might add a graduated filter over just the bottom part of these mountains right here, and actually reset everything for the first wall and bring up the exposure just a little bit, just because I think the exposure might be just a hint too dark. Now I definitely don't want to blow any of this picture right here, but just bringing it up a little bit works even better. So because we brought up the exposure even more, let's go into the adjustment brush and grab another adjustment brush, and this time go plus contrast and plus clarity again, and even add an additional layer of clarity and contrast in some of the parts of the image, so that way we really get even more differentiation between the dark and the bright parts. I really just want to add some more over here, really make this whole picture look very dramatic, and I think that looks pretty good. So the whole idea of that is to really get some differentiation between dark and bright parts, and really kind of add some different levels of clarity and contrast. So here, as you can see, we have some really dark parts, some really dark rocks, and we also have some kind of bright rocks and where there is not so much clarity and contrast added. So I really like this look. Let's actually grab another graduated filter, this time just for the very bottom here, really just a very small portion. Then I'm gonna reset everything for now and just bring down the exposure down here, so that way you really get to close out the picture and you add an additional layer of vignetting, and this can often work really well, especially in black and white pictures. And actually another trick that I wanted to show you is that you can grab another graduated filter here, and as you can see in this photo, the light is kind of coming from the top right portion, so you can exaggerate that by just adding another graduated filter with a very soft edge. Reset everything here and just bring up the exposure slightly, really just a notch, and then also grab another graduated filter here for the bottom left and actually kind of add a little bit more clarity and contrast just for the bottom left, as well as going into the minus exposure a little bit, so that way you really get a nice sense of depth and you really get to exaggerate the exposure and the lighting situation in this picture. So I think I'm pretty much done. Actually, let me try and add another graduated filter just for the very top portion of the sky right here, a very harsh edge. And then I'm just gonna reset everything and bring down the exposure here as well. So this way we really get to close out the picture from both the bottom and also the top. So let's see, before any graduated filters, here's before and here's after. So you really can see we've added so much more dynamic and so much more additional contrast in just some certain parts of the image. And I really like this look. It makes everything way more interesting and way more dynamic rather than just having everything very contrasty. So I think that definitely works very well. And actually, I think I'm gonna add some more dodge and burning here just with the radial filter. I've already added dodge and burning with the adjustment brush, but I really just want to add some more different versions of dodge and burning with the adjustment brush. For that, just be sure that the feather is at 100 and that you invert the mask. And first of all, I'm just gonna go a little bit into the plus exposure and kind of maybe even bring up the exposure even more, so that looks pretty good. Maybe even mix that with clarity. I know it's really a long tutorial here, but I really just want to make this very in-depth and really show you all the different options that you have of adding dodge and burning, adding local contrast, and really complexify the whole lighting situation for the picture. So let's right click duplicate here, maybe drag another radial filter over here. This really is a task that I usually just, skip and then just show you the before and after, but I really just wanted to keep this video tutorial very raw and really show you every single step from start to finish. So I think that looks pretty good. The good thing about radial filters here is that you can just go to a single radial filter and change the settings, and it will just affect this very radial filter. And I think that looks pretty good. Actually, a last thing that I might want to try out at least is go into the adjustment brush once again and go into the negative exposure right here and kind of make a very big adjustment brush and just add some negative exposure over the left part right here. So that is definitely a little bit too much. Actually, let me try and press down the Alt key so I can get rid of the mask down here, and now we really just have a mask over here. So let me try and bring down the exposure even more so we really get even more a sense of contrast and vignetting. And let me grab another adjustment brush and really go for the very left portion right here and make this even darker. So I really don't even know if it works. I think that works a little bit better, just this adjustment brush right here rather than the pretty big selection. So actually, let me try and bring up this exposure right here. I really don't know if you can follow along with me with what adjustments I do, but I really just wanted to add some more additional vignetting in the left corners right here. So I really think that I'm done here. Actually, never mind. It really can sometimes be very difficult to edit because there's always one more thing that you want to add. And the thing that I've just noticed is that this spot where I've added the plus exposure radial filter really is a little bit too bright, so I'm gonna cut down on just the exposure for this part, and I think I am finally done. So let's see, as always, the before and after. Here is the raw file in color, and I mean a ton of difference, really totally different picture. And here is the black and white picture without any adjustments, and here's the picture after. I really like this picture. I think it's a very solid picture, and I really just love these different tones of contrast, of darkness and of clarity on these individual rocks. So I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and you've been able to learn some tips and techniques from it. If you did so, please take a second to click this thumbs up button. It really helps me out a ton and is hugely appreciated. Also be sure to subscribe for more videos just like this one, Lightroom edits, Lightroom tutorials, landscape photography edits, all kind of photography related videos. I'm currently uploading one video every single day of the week. Thank you very much for watching and bearing with me through these 25 minutes of editing this photo. I really hope you can take some techniques and use them in your own black and white editing. Anyways, really enough of me talking. I want to wish you a great day, great pictures, and please take care.